All right, we are back. Thanks for joining us here on a special edition of Open Line. Nick Beres here with News Channel 5 legal analyst Nick Leonardo. Justice for Joe Clyde. We're taking phone calls and messages on Facebook this evening as we prepare for our gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial, which does, some of you are asking, begin next Tuesday with jury selection in a county outside of Dixon. They're going to bring a jury in. We believe it's either going to be Knoxville or Chattanooga. We think the trial itself with arguments will begin probably by Thursday, and then we'll go maybe at least a week, possibly longer. Nick, some people on Facebook are asking, how can they get a fair trial with all the publicity, shows like this that we're doing here? I would say that there was a ton of publicity early on when the child disappeared because we had to have it out there before an arrest was made to try to find him. A lot of the searching, getting the word out there and all of that, it just comes with the territory. But the answer would be that's why we're bringing a jury in, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the only answer that you have. I mean, obviously the media has a role. I mean, when they're searching for a lost child, I mean, what better way than to put that child's picture out? And that's what media does. And then as it unfolds, I mean, it continues to be newsworthy and very interesting, but that's one of the things we have in the criminal justice system is to go somewhere to a like community. In this case, maybe it's somewhere in East Tennessee, and pick a jury. And again, it's not, these people don't have to have never heard of Joe Clyde Daniels. They just can't make their mind up about guilt or innocence, and that's what they're looking for. So, I mean, obviously people may have heard of that, but, they don't get the local news channels, and, they probably haven't heard about that as much as people in Middle Tennessee have.
Sure. And, I'll be honest, I was covering this story when it first happened, and it broke my heart, this little boy and what's happened to him. And part of my point from the media aspect is not thinking about trials and where it's going to go and who's going to be charged, but I was not going to let this story die. Okay, we have cases like this that come on. This was 3 years ago, and I made a point of thinking to myself, I'm going to do a story on this every few months, if nothing else, to keep it in the public eye and maybe stimulate some new leads in the case. That was my goal, and I've done this for 3 years following it. So that was my goal there, and you're absolutely right. I'm not worried about publicity. And you say also, people can know about a case. Oftentimes they do. It's just whether or not you can set aside your personal feelings and make a ruling based on what you hear in the courtroom.
That's exactly right. I mean, next month they're going to be, selecting jurors, prospective jurors for the Delkey Hammer case, and that's here in Middle Tennessee, and obviously everyone has heard about that.
Yep.
But the question is, have you made your mind up? It's okay to have heard about it, but have you made your mind up as to guilt or innocence?
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go to some more phone calls. We've got Tony, I believe, is next on the horn. Tony, good evening, Tony. Are you there, Tony?
Good evening.
Hey, go ahead, sir.
Hey, I had two things. I wondered about the lady who all of a sudden surfaced about all of a sudden she's daughter's had contact with a child with dirty pajamas, and then I just can't understand how come she didn't go outside right at that point and try to find out where he was at or search for him, or she just all of a sudden just showed up. I mean, it just for the prosecution or for the defense, and so it's kind of funny.
Yeah, let me explain that to you, how that played out. It was basically a situation where a home about 6 miles from where Joe Clyde Daniels, lived and disappeared that night. It was the next day, another small child, 3 or 4 years old, was outside and came running in to tell her grandmother that she had just talked to a little boy in dirty pajamas. At that point, the grandmother went out and the boy was then gone. Okay, but she described it, said that she asked what his name was, and he said 5. The grandparents have said sometimes Joe Clyde, who is autistic, would not use his name but would use his age. And what happened at that point, people are wondering, well, why did she just surface now? No. That mother, when she heard about this from the grandmother and the child, immediately filed a report with the police in McEwen. Okay, they filed a report. It was there. But the report was never followed up on the time, because by the time the report, I think, came out, Joseph Daniels had already confessed. And at that point, some of the leads they stopped following up on because they thought they had their man. So she did not surface all of a sudden. But again, as I've said, because her young child is not able to testify or really remember to it now, she is not going to be able to testify to that to the jury because they're calling it hearsay. Explain what that means, Nick.
Well, hearsay is an out-of-court statement or document, used in court to prove the truth of the matter asserted in that particular statement. And so repeating something that someone told you outside of court generally is not not going to be admissible absent some exceptions, and sometimes the exceptions swallow up the rule when it comes to hearsay. But how old did you say the child was again?
The child that saw this, I think 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah, that's awfully young. I
mean,
because one of the things that you have to be able to do as a witness that testifies in court, you have to be able to understand the oath. Okay?
Right.
And so we've seen before in some of these trials that we've covered, they may have a child witness, and the child they'll ask him questions about the difference between truth and lie to establish that the child can respect the oath to tell the truth. And obviously 3 or 4 is going to be considerably too young for that.
Yeah. All right. So, but that was a good question, Tony. I think a lot of people wondered that. Let's go next to Melissa. Hello, Melissa.
Yes, sir.
Hey there.
So I have a question.
Yes.
If the parents go to trial, okay, do you think that it would put pressure on them to where they can tell where the baby is?
Well, you mean they're not going to stand trial together, but that they might cut a deal and tell where the baby is to get a better sentence? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, like if they put, with everything going on and the jury's there and everything, maybe it would put a little pressure on both of the parents when she goes to trial, and then when he goes, maybe it'll put a little pressure on.
Well, when the trial comes, we know that Crystal Daniels, the mother, will be tried. It's not scheduled yet after Joseph. Joseph went out on more than one occasion with investigators saying he was going to bring them to the body, and he never did. And we don't know if he forgot, if he's playing games, you know, if he didn't really dispose of a body and so he's just messing around. I mean, now, if all of a sudden he says, look, I'm going to take you to the body now, and they'll go with him. And if he leads it to them, end of story, then they've got their case closed. But I don't see him doing that.
No, I don't see him doing that, but Melissa raises a really good point, and that is, you know, when you get to the trial day, a lot of times that is the day of reckoning. And so when you know that you're ready to walk into that courthouse and there are 12 people that are getting ready to decide your fate, people a lot of times do end up pleading guilty, or, you know, if it's a custody case and, you know, you're going before the judge that day for a particular trial, a lot of times people do end up working out their differences because the day of reckoning is here, and sometimes people are more reasonable. And I think sometimes people are scared of the outcome in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go next to Myra. Myra, good evening. Hi, Myra. Are you there, Myra? All right, we'll come back. Let's go to Carl. Carl, good evening. Hi, Carl.
Good evening to you, gentlemen. How are you guys tonight?
Doing well.
Doing pretty good, Carl. What's up?
Well, few things. Number one, I've been seeing this on TV for the past few years, and it kind of sickens me to hear a thing like this. Of course, I love kids.
Sure. It upsets everyone. It's awful.
Yes, and number two, I hope the guy gets what's coming to him. He did confess that he did it, and if he pleads insanity, it is possible that they may put him in a straitjacket for the rest of his life. I don't know how that'll work out.
Well, there's no indication. In fact, I can tell you he's not going to plead insanity. The defense's argument is going to be there's no physical evidence to even prove Joe Clyde is dead. And they're going to make the argument, if they have to explain where he went, that this was an autistic child that was prone to sometimes finding ways to get out of the house, and that he wandered away. And he was either abducted or he wandered somewhere where he hasn't been found. That's going to be maybe their explanation.
And all of that sounds great, Nick, until the prosecution comes in with these 5 confessions, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
that's you know, that's where they're going to go with this. But I don't know how. I'm anxious to see what they do with those confessions, because that is the pink elephant in the room, and that's what they're going to have to really deal with as a defense team. You lay out a fine scenario there, but again, I think jurors have to somehow relate to the criminally accused, or relate to a set of facts.
Yeah.
And you're a parent, I'm a parent, and I can never envision a scenario where I would, you know, admit or confess to killing my child if I didn't do it.
Right.
It just doesn't, you know, that's going to be a bitter pill for these jurors to swallow. And so the defense team has to work cut out for them to somehow to place this in context. And obviously, the only one person that can really do that is Mr. Daniels, and I don't see him taking the stand.
Yeah, we don't think he'll take the stand to explain. But if you were a juror, you'd want to ask him, Why would you confess to killing your son if you didn't?
That's right.
Now, his attorney has said that he was coerced, and this is a man who has some mental issues, and they kept him there and questioned him for a long period of time, and who knows? It is true, though, that people have falsely confessed to various serious crimes. It happens.
Well, and what if they were to say, they have 2 other children, what if they say, all right, Mr. Daniels, you confessed to this, we know you did it. If we do that, we'll cut a deal for your wife, and we'll let her go, and she'll be able to raise your other 2 kids rather than the both of you spend a very, very long time in jail. But as Carl raised the issue of insanity, that's an affirmative defense, which means that the defense is going to have to, put the prosecution on notice that they're going to claim that. You can't just walk in the courtroom and say, hey, this person is legally insane. That's something that you have to place them on notice. I don't believe there's been any notice like that filed, so obviously they're not going to be arguing any kind of incompetency or any sort of insanity defense on behalf of Mr. Daniels.
Debbie asks a question that a lot of us have wondered. Maybe on the homicide charge for the father, he's charged with murder, but for Crystal, both parents have $1 million bond. And Debbie's asking, well, gosh, $1 million, especially for Crystal? That's way over what her charge is.
Well, and it's I could understand maybe Mr. Daniels having a high bond like that, but Crystal is charged with, there is potentially a Class A felony she's charged with, but bond is a constitutional right under the federal constitution and under our state constitution. And we're seeing a huge push by the ACLU, the Justice Department, on bonds that really act just like a debtor's prison, because you don't have the money, because you're presumed innocent. Everyone that's on bond or everyone that's in jail that wants to be on bond is presumed innocence, and that presumption travels with them throughout this process. Sure. And I think for her, $1 million bond is really over the top, without a doubt. But I think they are also leaving her in jail because I think they're trying to maybe, have them both incarcerated to maybe make one of them plead guilty, or maybe they'll, smoke the body out from one of the 2 of them.
Do you believe it happens sometimes with district attorneys or I don't know who set the bond. Would that be the judge, I suppose?
The grand jury will set a bond on what's a gold capias. It's a recommendation. And then they go in there and they can ask for the bond to be lowered. And then the judge makes that determination based upon some factors set forth in the bond statute.
Well, I don't know what's a right or wrong bond, but neither of these 2 people that are locked up right now could make a $10,000 bond, much less $1 million bond. A statement was being made with $1 million. They're sending a statement there because neither of them could have made $500,000, but $1 million that gets your attention. Oh, they must, there's some strategy there.
Well, I think you're right, but neither one of them probably could have made a lower bond. But I do think it's something that's sending a message. But it's important to note that the judge can put whatever conditions that reasonably ensure that the defendant will appear in court on those bond conditions. So I think the conditions are much more important than the amount of money that you post. I mean, such as electronic monitoring, such as a curfew, such as where you can go and whom you can be present with. And those are the kinds of things that I think are more important than just having people incarcerated. But I do believe that the system there in that judicial district is sending a message.
I agree. Let's go to, I think we have Laverne. Laverne, good evening, Laverne. Go ahead, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
I have a comment. This child has not been found, no particles or anything. I'm truly believing, and this is a far-out theory, but I believe they were so involved with drugs. And I believe that they may have let somebody have this child in the place of drugs. And whoever the child is with, now it's to the point, because of so much publicity, now it's to the point they are afraid to come forward.
Listen,
that's fascinating.
That's a theory I've heard, and wouldn't that be wonderful? And what I mean by that is, that would mean he's alive somewhere, which would be a great thing. But now, there's never been an indication that the 2 parents really were involved in the drugs. Now, they may have been on medications, but I don't know that there's been any evidence that the parents were involved with drugs. But there could be other issues. Did they sell the child? Did they give the child away?
Well, to Laverne's point, I mean, that's a theory I hadn't thought about, and I think that's it's very fair thought to raise. But in order to prove someone guilty of aggravated child abuse, one of the things that the state could rely upon is that they were in the business of meth manufacturing. Okay, so that is one of the things that if there is any meth involved, we haven't heard that at all.
We never have.
Never have heard that. But if there was, I mean, that could kind of pair with the prosecution's theory.
Yeah, but some people even asked if Joseph was convicted and Joe Clyde turned up living in another state, what would that mean? Well, first, it would mean the boy's alive, and 2, that would mean he was wrongly convicted and he's released that day. So We'll see.
You know, of murder, yes, but maybe not the other charges.
Yeah, yeah, right. Just keep in mind, though, that, you know, law enforcement makes no bones about it. They believe that Joe Clyde Daniels is dead. They just don't have physical evidence to prove it.
You know, and I think it'd be interesting, of course, we don't know this, but I wonder, you know, and maybe when this trial's over, someone could come on to Morning Line or Open Line that we're doing now, but it'd be interesting, how many tips do you get on something like this? I mean, are they just exhausted by going and checking on these tips? Are there thousands of tips, or are there just a handful? I'd be really curious to know. You know?
Me too. I know the file is huge. I know the discovery is huge, and there was some tip that came last spring that led the TBI to go back to that home in Dixon County and dig it up all over again. All they found was animal bones. We'll take a break on that note when we come back. If you're on hold, stay there, 737-7587, or join us as well, Facebook Live at NewsChannel5.com. We're going until 8 o'clock to take your questions in preparation for justice for Joe Clyde, the trial beginning next week. We'll be right back.